Hi everyone. I'm sure many of you have felt that eerie sensation of being watched. This time, for friends experienced it too. But what happened next was far from ordinary. The night was unusually dark, the moon obscured by heavy clouds that seemed to weigh down the air itself. Sam clicked his flashlight on, the narrow beam barely piercing the dense shadows of the forest. Behind him, Alex shuffled nervously, holding a crinkled map of the area they had printed off the internet. Mia adjusted her backpack, glancing warily at the towering pines around them, their gnarled branches twisted into unnatural shapes. Josh, as always, led the way, exuding his typical bravado. "Come on," Josh called back, his voice just a little too loud for the stillness of the night. "We're not going to see anything cool if we stick to the edge." Sam frowned. "The edge is fine with me. We don't need to go deep to prove this is just some local myth." "Exactly," Mia muttered. "We already look stupid enough. Let's not end up on one of those missing persons posters." Josh waved them off. "You're all way too paranoid. We're not going to end up as some unsolved mystery. We're just going to debunk one." For weeks, rumors have been circulating online about the woods near their small town. People spoke in hushed tones about a shadowy, humanoid figure, a giant, some said, seen in fleeting glimpses among the trees. Others swore they'd heard strange, guttural noises or found footprints too large to belong to any known animal. No one had definitive proof, of course, but that only fueled the intrigue. Josh, ever the thrill-seeker, had convinced the others to join him on this late-night expedition, hoping to record footage for his fledgling YouTube channel. Urban Explorer Josh had exactly 12 subscribers, a fact that made Sam question why they were risking their necks for a guy who couldn't break double digits. The group followed a narrow trail that cut through the dense forest, their flashlights creating faint, trembling halos in the darkness. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken. Gone were the cheerful chirps of crickets or the rustling of small animals. The woods were utterly silent, save for the crunch of their footsteps on the dirt path. Mia stopped abruptly, her light sweeping over the ground. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at this." The others gathered around. In the soft glow of her flashlight, an enormous footprint was visible in the dirt. It was vaguely human in shape, but grotesquely large, the toes elongated and claw-like. "Probably just some weird boot print," Josh said dismissively, though his voice wavered. "Boot print?" Alex shot back. "Who wears boots the size of a small couch?" Sam knelt down, his fingers brushing the edge of the print. The ground around it was deeply compressed, as though whatever had left it weighed far more than a person should. "Let's just keep moving," Josh urged. "Maybe we'll find who, or what, left it." Reluctantly, the group continued, their earlier banter replaced by uneasy silence. The trail grew fainter, barely distinguishable from the surrounding underbrush. Shadows seemed to shift at the edges of their vision, though whenever they turned to look, they found nothing but trees. Sam's nerves were fraying. His hand tightened on his flashlight as he whispered to Mia, "Do you hear that?" Mia nodded, her face pale. "It's like breathing, but huge." Somewhere ahead, Josh stopped abruptly. He was staring into the distance, his flashlight frozen on a cluster of trees. "Did you guys see that?" "See what?" Alex asked, his voice tense. Josh hesitated. I think it was just a shadow. Let's keep going." But as they pressed on, Sam noticed something strange about the forest. The trees seemed to be closing in. The spaces between them grew narrower, their trunks twisting in unnatural ways. He told himself it was just his imagination, but when Mia stumbled over a gnarled root that seemed to have emerged from nowhere, he couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were alive. The group reached a small clearing and paused to catch their breath. The air here was even heavier, almost suffocating. In the dim light, Sam noticed faint marks carved into the trees around them, symbols that didn't belong to any language he recognized. "Okay," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I think we've gone far enough. Let's just say we didn't find anything and head back." But before anyone could respond, a sound cut through the stillness. A deep, guttural noise that made the hairs on Sam's neck stand on end. It wasn't quite a growl, nor was it human. It came from somewhere ahead, and it was close. Josh's bravado faltered. "Okay, maybe we should head back." The group turned to retrace their steps, but the trail behind them seemed to have vanished. Where there had been a clear path moments ago, there was now only a tangle of dense underbrush. Panic began to set in. Alex pulled out the map, his hands shaking. "This doesn't make sense. We didn't walk through this. We'll figure it out," Sam said, though he didn't believe his own words. His flashlight swept the trees, and for the briefest moment, he saw something, a hulking shape that moved too quickly to be fully seen. It was gone in an instant, but it left behind an impression of immense size and unnatural fluidity. "Did anyone else see that?" he whispered. No one answered. Somewhere in the distance, the guttural noise came again, louder this time. And then, as if in response, the forest itself seemed to shudder. "Run," Mia said softly, her voice barely audible. No one argued. They didn't know what they were running from, but they knew they couldn't stay. The group sprinted through the forest, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they dodged low-hanging branches and twisted roots. The guttural noise reverberated through the woods, seeming to come from all directions at once. Each step felt heavier than the last, the oppressive darkness closing in on them like a living thing. Sam's breath came in ragged gasps as he glanced over his shoulder. He couldn't see anything following them, but the feeling of being watched, hunted, was unmistakable. "Slow down," Alex wheezed, stumbling as he clutched the map to his chest. "We don't even know where we're going." Josh skidded to a halt, doubling over to catch his breath. "We have to keep moving," he said, though his voice cracked with fear. "We can't run blindly," Mia said, her flashlight flickering. She smacked it against her palm, the beam stabilizing just long enough to illuminate her pale, terrified face. "We need to figure out where we are." Sam raised his flashlight and scanned the area. The forest around them was alien, unrecognizable. The trail they'd been following was long gone, replaced by dense underbrush and uneven terrain. The towering trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches forming a canopy so thick that not even a hint of moonlight could break through. Mia began, but she froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she stared past Sam. "What?" Sam asked, turning to follow her gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing but shadows. Then, slowly, one of the shadows moved. The creature was barely visible, its massive form blending seamlessly with the darkness. It stood between two trees, its hunched posture making it seem almost part of the forest itself. Sam's flashlight caught the faintest glint of its eyes, two pinpricks of pale, glowing light that seemed to pierce the gloom. "Is that a person?" Alex whispered, though he already knew the answer. The creature straightened slightly, its form becoming clearer. It was humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders unnaturally broad. Its skin, or what passed for it, seemed to ripple like shadowy water. Then it moved. The creature didn't walk or run. It glided between the trees with an unsettling smoothness, its movements so fluid that it felt unreal. Sam's stomach twisted as he realized the creature wasn't making any sound. For something so large, it should have been crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches with every step. But the forest was deathly silent, save for the pounding of their own hearts. "Turn off your lights," Mia hissed. "What?" Josh snapped, his hands tightening on his camera. "Turn them off," she repeated. "It can see us." Reluctantly, Sam clicked off his flashlight, plunging them into near-total darkness. The faint glow from Josh's camera screen was the only source of light now, casting eerie shadows across their faces. The creature slowed, tilting its head as if searching for them. "Don't move," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. They stood frozen, their breaths shallow and silent. Sam's mind raced. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his muscles refused to move. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew that would only draw the creature's attention. Josh, however, couldn't resist. He lifted his camera, aiming it at the creature. "Don't," Sam mouthed, but it was too late. The camera let out a faint beep as Josh adjusted the focus. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, its glowing eyes locking onto them. "Run!" Mia screamed, breaking the silence. This time, no one hesitated. They tore through the forest, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. The guttural noise returned, louder and angrier than before. Sam didn't dare look back, but he could hear the creature moving behind them. Its movements were impossibly fast, its massive frame somehow slipping effortlessly between the trees. "Over here!" Alex shouted, veering to the left. Sam followed, his heart hammering in his chest. The terrain grew steeper, and he realized they were heading downhill. Loose rocks and damp leaves made the descent treacherous, but the slope gave them a burst of speed. Josh tripped and fell hard, his camera skidding out of his hands. Sam hesitated, torn between helping him and saving himself. "Go!" Josh shouted, scrambling to his feet. "I'm fine." Mia grabbed Sam's arm and pulled him forward. "We have to keep moving." They reached the bottom of the hill and stumbled into another clearing. This one was different from the last. The air here was colder, and the ground was littered with strange objects. Animal bones, broken branches, and what looked like shards of rusted metal. "What is this place?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. Sam didn't answer. His eyes were drawn to the trees surrounding the clearing. Each one bore the same strange symbols they had seen earlier, carved deep into the bark and glowing faintly in the darkness. Josh staggered into the clearing, clutching his side. "Well, what is this stuff?" Before anyone could respond, the guttural noise echoed through the clearing again, this time impossibly close. "It's here," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. Sam turned toward the sound, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Now in the dim light, they could see it more clearly. Its body seemed to absorb the light around it, its surface shifting like liquid shadow. Its elongated arms ended in claw-like hands, and its hunched posture made it seem even larger than before. "What do we do?" Alex asked, his voice cracking with panic. The creature took a single step forward, the ground beneath it groaning as if in protest. Sam clenched his fists, his mind racing. "We need to go now." Without waiting for agreement, he grabbed Mia's arm and bolted for the opposite edge of the clearing. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Behind them, the creature let out a sound that was almost a roar, though it was deeper, more resonant, like the groaning of ancient wood. They didn't look back. The forest grew eerily quiet as the group stumbled forward, their breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. The creature's roar still echoed in their ears, but now it was gone, swallowed by the suffocating stillness. They didn't know if it had retreated or if it was still watching from somewhere in the darkness. Sam led the group, his flashlight cutting a shaky path through the shadows. He kept glancing over his shoulder, searching for any sign of movement, but the forest offered no clues. Mia stayed close behind him, her hand brushing the edge of his jacket like a lifeline. "We need to figure out where we are," Alex said, his voice trembling. He unfolded the crumpled map again, but his hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled. "It doesn't matter where we are," Mia whispered. "We need to get out." Josh stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "And go where? Do you even know which way is out?" Mia didn't answer. None of them did. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to press closer with every step. The trees were no longer just obstacles. They felt like silent observers, looming over the group with a malevolent presence. Every now and then, Sam swore he heard something, a faint rustle, the crunch of leaves, but when he turned, there was nothing there. "Let's just pick a direction and stick to it," Josh finally said. "We can't keep standing around like idiots." For once, no one argued with him. They set off again, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. The ground beneath their feet grew uneven, the forest floor covered in tangled roots and slick with damp leaves. It became harder to walk without stumbling, and the group's nerves frayed with every misstep. Then they heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound like heavy breathing, carried on the wind. It was distant at first, barely distinguishable from the rustling of the trees. But as they continued walking, it grew louder, closer. Sam stopped in his tracks, raising his hand to signal the others. "Do you hear that?" Mia nodded, her flashlight beam trembling as she scanned the trees. Josh tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "It's just the wind." "That's not the wind," Alex said firmly. The breathing was unmistakable now. It was deep, resonant, and unnervingly slow. It seemed to echo all around them, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. "Turn off the lights," Mia whispered. "What?" Josh said, incredulous. "Turn them off," she hissed. "If we can't see it, maybe it can't see us." Reluctantly, they clicked off their flashlights, plunging the group into near-total darkness. The air grew colder, the kind of chill that seeped into their bones. They stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. The sound continued, a slow inhale and exhale that seemed impossibly close now. Then it stopped. The silence was deafening. "Is it gone?" Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. Sam opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, there was a sudden, sharp crack, a branch snapping under something heavy. "Run," Mia said, her voice low and urgent. They didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted blindly through the darkness, the forest a blur of shadows and motion. Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he ducked under low-hanging branches and leapt over fallen logs. The others were close behind, their panicked footsteps crunching against the forest floor. The breathing returned, louder now, and accompanied by a new sound, a deep, guttural clicking, like the grinding of stone. Sam risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately wished he hadn't. The creature was there, gliding effortlessly between the trees, its massive form barely visible but undeniably real. Its glowing eyes cut through the darkness like twin beacons, fixed on the fleeing group. "This way," Alex shouted, veering to the left. They followed without question, crashing through the underbrush until they stumbled into another clearing. This one was smaller than the last, bordered by dense thickets that seemed impenetrable. "We're trapped," Mia said, her voice trembling. "No, we're not," Josh said, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the camera hanging around his neck. "We just needed to figure out where it is." He raised the camera and scanned the edge of the clearing, the screen casting a dim glow. The breathing stopped again. The silence stretched on, suffocating and absolute. "Do you see it?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Josh didn't respond. "Josh," Mia pressed. Josh lowered the camera slowly, his face pale. "It's not out there anymore." The group froze, their eyes darting wildly around the clearing. "What do you mean?" Sam asked, his voice tight. Josh didn't answer. Then they heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. It was the clicking again, but this time it wasn't coming from the edge of the clearing. It was coming from above. Sam's head snapped upward, his flashlight flicking on instinctively. The beam illuminated the creature, perched high in the branches of a massive tree. Its limbs were impossibly long, wrapping around the trunk like a spider. It stared down at them with those glowing eyes, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. For a moment, no one moved. Then the creature began to descend, its claws digging into the bark as it lowered itself toward the ground with an unsettling, fluid grace. "Run," Sam said, his voice breaking. They bolted once more, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The forest closed in around them, the trees seeming to twist and shift, guiding them deeper into the darkness. But no matter how fast they ran, the creature's presence was always just behind them, an unrelenting shadow that refused to let them go. The group didn't know how long they had been running. The forest seemed endless, a maze of gnarled trees and choking darkness that offered no reprieve. Their lungs burned, their legs felt like lead, but the sense of something massive pursuing them never wavered. Finally, Sam burst through the underbrush and stumbled into another clearing. The others followed, collapsing onto the damp ground, gasping for air. This clearing was unlike the others they had seen. The air was colder, carrying a faint metallic tang that stung their nostrils. The ground was uneven, littered with jagged stones and what looked like animal bones. Strange carvings covered the rocks, their shapes crude but deliberate, symbols and spirals that seemed to pulsate faintly in the dim light of their flashlights. "What is this place?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Josh knelt next to one of the rocks, running his fingers over the markings. "These look ancient, like older than anything that should be here." Sam's flashlight swept over the area, his unease growing. The trees surrounding the clearing were marked too, their trunks scored with deep grooves that formed the same strange patterns. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something they weren't meant to see. "This isn't just a random spot," Alex said, his voice trembling. "It's like a nest or something." "No," Mia said, shaking her head. "It's worse than that. Look around." Sam followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The bones weren't just scattered. They were arranged, forming crude piles and circles around the edge of the clearing. In the center was a massive, jagged stone slab, streaked with something dark that glistened faintly under the beam of his flashlight. "It's a ritual site," Mia said, her voice hollow. Josh shook his head violently. "No way. This can't be what it looks like." The guttural clicking sound returned, echoing through the clearing. It was louder now, and somehow more menacing. "It's coming," Alex said, his voice breaking. "Hide," Sam ordered, his voice low but firm. The group scattered, diving behind the jagged rocks and piles of bones. Sam crouched low, his back pressed against a tree. His heart hammered in his chest as the sound grew closer, accompanied by the faint rustling of leaves. He dared to peek around the edge of the tree and saw it. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive frame dwarfing the clearing. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs bending in ways that defied logic. The glow from its eyes was dimmer now, as though it didn't need them to see. Sam clenched his fists, willing himself to stay still. The creature seemed to scan the clearing, its head swiveling slowly. Then it stopped, tilting its head toward the stone slab at the center. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature stood motionless, its towering frame blending with the shadows. Then it knelt. Sam's breath caught in his throat as the creature placed one clawed hand on the stone slab. It let out a low, resonant growl that reverberated through the clearing, making the ground beneath him tremble. "What is it doing?" Mia mouthed from her hiding spot behind a nearby rock. Sam didn't answer. He couldn't. The creature's growl grew louder, more insistent. The symbols on the stones began to glow faintly, casting an eerie blue light across the clearing. The air grew heavier, and Sam felt an inexplicable pressure building in his chest, as though the forest itself was alive and watching. Josh, who had hidden closest to the creature, raised his camera slowly. He gestured to Sam, mouthing the words, "I'm filming this." Sam shook his head violently, but Josh ignored him. He adjusted the camera, its faint beep breaking the oppressive silence. The creature froze. Sam's heart stopped as the towering figure turned its head slowly, its glowing eyes locking onto Josh's hiding spot. "Run!" Sam shouted, breaking the silence. Josh scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the edge of the clearing. The creature roared, a sound so loud and guttural that it seemed to shake the trees themselves. Sam grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her toward the opposite direction. "Go! Now!" The group scattered again, darting through the trees in a desperate bid to escape. Sam's mind raced as he ran, the sound of the creature's pursuit echoing behind him. The forest seemed to shift around them, the trees growing denser and the ground more treacherous. Sam tripped over a root and fell hard, his flashlight skittering away. He scrambled to his feet, his hands stinging from the fall. "Where's Josh?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. Sam didn't answer. He didn't want to think about it. Ahead, Alex shouted, "Over here! I see something." Sam and Mia followed, their legs burning with exertion. They caught up to Alex, who was standing in front of what looked like a cave entrance. The opening was jagged and narrow, hidden by thick vines and moss. "Inside," Alex urged. The three of them squeezed through the opening, the cold, damp air inside the cave hitting them like a wall. Sam turned back just in time to see the creature emerge from the trees, its glowing eyes scanning the area. He ducked into the cave, his heart pounding as he pressed his back against the cold stone. The creature's roar echoed through the forest, but it didn't follow. For the first time that night, they were safe. Or so they thought. The cave was suffocatingly dark and cold, the air damp with a faint metallic tang. Sam's flashlight flickered weakly, barely illuminating the narrow, jagged walls. His breathing was shallow, his pulse still racing from their frantic escape. Beside him, Mia and Alex leaned against the stone, their faces pale and drawn. "Where's Josh?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Sam shook his head. "I don't know." Mia stared at the ground, her voice barely audible. "We should have stopped him. He didn't have to film it." A guttural roar echoed from outside, reverberating through the cave. The sound sent a chill down Sam's spine, and he instinctively switched off his flashlight. "Quiet," he whispered, motioning for the others to do the same. The three of them huddled in the darkness, the silence pressing down on them. They could hear faint noises from outside, the crunch of leaves, the snapping of branches, and the low, resonant clicking sound that had haunted them all night. "It's still out there," Mia whispered. "Yeah," Sam muttered, "and it's not leaving until we do." For what felt like hours, they remained in the cave, too terrified to move. The creature's presence was like a weight pressing down on them, its guttural sounds and occasional roars reminding them of just how close it was. Finally, the forest grew silent again. "Maybe it's gone," Alex said, though his voice lacked conviction. Sam wasn't so sure. "We can't stay here forever. If it finds the cave," he trailed off, the unspoken consequence hanging heavily in the air. "Do you think it knows we're in here?" Mia asked. "Maybe," Sam said, "but either way, we need to move. If we stay put, we're sitting ducks." Alex hesitated. "And if it's waiting for us out there, then we don't give it the chance to catch us," Sam said firmly. "We stick together, we move fast, and we stay quiet." The others nodded reluctantly. They edged their way back toward the cave entrance, moving as silently as possible. The faint moonlight filtering through the vines was a harsh contrast to the suffocating darkness of the cave, but Sam couldn't bring himself to feel relief. "Ready?" he whispered. Mia and Alex nodded, their faces pale but determined. Sam pushed aside the vines and stepped cautiously into the forest. The air outside was cold and still, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. "Which way?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. Sam scanned the forest, his flashlight off to avoid drawing attention. He pointed to the faint outline of a narrow path leading uphill. "That way. Higher ground might give us a better view." They moved quickly but carefully, their footsteps muffled by the damp forest floor. The woods around them seemed to close in, the trees taller and more twisted than before. Sam tried to shake the feeling that the forest itself was alive, watching their every move. Then he heard it, a faint clicking sound, distant but unmistakable. "It's back," Mia whispered, her voice shaking. Sam motioned for them to keep moving. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The clicking grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps. The ground seemed to tremble slightly with each step, and Sam's heart raced as he realized the creature was closing in. "Faster," he urged. They broke into a run, the narrow path twisting and turning as it led them deeper into the forest. The clicking sound was closer now, almost on top of them. Sam risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the creature's glowing eyes, bobbing and weaving through the trees as it pursued them. "Up there!" Alex shouted, pointing to a large, fallen tree ahead. The massive trunk formed a natural bridge over a deep ravine, its surface slick with moss and rainwater. "Are you kidding?" Mia hissed. "It's our only chance," Alex said. Without waiting for an answer, he scrambled onto the tree trunk and began making his way across. Sam followed, his heart pounding as he balanced precariously on the slippery surface. Behind him, Mia hesitated, glancing back at the glowing eyes that were now impossibly close. "Mia, go!" Sam shouted. She nodded and climbed onto the trunk, moving as quickly as she could without losing her balance. The creature reached the edge of the ravine just as Mia jumped off the other side. It let out a deafening roar, the sound shaking the very trees around them. For a moment, Sam thought they were safe. But then the creature stepped onto the fallen tree, its massive weight causing the trunk to groan ominously. "Run!" Sam shouted, grabbing Mia's hand and pulling her toward the nearest path. The three of them sprinted through the forest, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing fainter behind them. Sam didn't dare look back, too afraid of what he might see. They finally emerged into another clearing, this one smaller and less foreboding. The air here felt lighter, and the faint glow of the moon peeked through the canopy above. Alex collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Did we lose it? I don't know, Sam said, scanning the forest nervously. Mia sat down beside them, her face pale and streaked with dirt. What do we do now? Sam didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. In the distance, a faint clicking sound echoed through the trees. It was still out there. The clearing felt like a brief reprieve, but Sam knew better than to trust it. The creature was still out there, stalking them, and its guttural clicking was growing louder with each passing second. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he couldn't let them stop. We can't stay here, Sam said, his voice firm. Stay here, Alex hissed. We can't keep running either. It's like the woods are alive or something. It knows where we are no matter what we do. Mia, still sitting on the ground, was silent. Her gaze was locked on something just beyond the clearing, her expression unreadable. Mia, Sam asked, kneeling beside her. What is it? Over there, she whispered, pointing toward the far side of the clearing. Sam turned his flashlight in the direction she indicated. At first, he saw nothing but trees. Then, as the beam swept lower, he spotted it, a partially buried object protruding from the earth. What is that? Alex asked, inching closer. Sam hesitated before walking toward it, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The object was weathered and worn, its surface covered in dirt and moss. He crouched down and brushed some of the debris away, revealing what appeared to be a large stone slab. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, symbols identical to the ones they had seen carved into the trees and rocks earlier. It's another marking, Sam said. No, Mia murmured, shaking her head. It's something else. Look closer. Sam leaned in, his fingers tracing the carvings. The symbols were arranged in a circular pattern, radiating outward from a central shape, a crude, humanoid figure etched in jagged lines. This is old, he muttered. Really old. Alex peered over his shoulder. And what does that help us with? How is this supposed to save us? Sam didn't answer. His gaze fell to the base of the slab, where a faint glint of metal caught his eye. He dug at the dirt with his hands, unearthing a small, rusted box. What is that? Mia asked, her voice hushed. Sam pried the box open, revealing a collection of yellowed papers inside. Most of the writing was too faded to read, but one page caught his attention. The words, though scrawled in a shaky hand, were still legible. The warden watches the trespassers. It hunts to protect, not to destroy. Disturb not the sacred places, and you may yet escape. What does that mean? Alex asked, his voice rising in panic. It's some kind of warning, Sam said, flipping through the papers. This warden, it's not just a monster. It's a protector of the forest. It only goes after people who disturb its territory. Mia's eyes widened. But we didn't do anything. We didn't touch anything. We came here, Sam said grimly. That was enough. The clicking sound grew louder, snapping their attention back to the trees. The creature was near, its shadowy form barely visible through the thick foliage. We don't have time for this, Alex said, his voice trembling. Sam's mind raced as he reread the warning. If the warden was a protector, then there had to be a way to appease it. He turned to the others. I think we have to go back to the clearing, the one with the stone slab. It seemed like its territory. Maybe we can leave something there. Make it stop chasing us. Go back. Alex shouted. Are you insane? We barely got out of there alive. Do you have a better idea? Sam snapped. Alex fell silent, his face pale. We have to try, Mia said. If we keep running, we're dead anyway. The journey back to the ritual site was agonizing. Every step felt like an eternity, the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down on them. The clicking followed them the entire way, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close. When they finally reached the clearing, the air felt colder than before. The glowing symbols on the rocks were brighter now, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. What now? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam placed the rusted box and its contents onto the stone slab in the center of the clearing. He stepped back, his hands shaking. I think this is what it wants. Proof that we understand what this place is, that we respect it. The creature emerged from the shadows before anyone could respond. It was even more massive up close, its towering frame hunched as it entered the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on the group, unblinking. The clicking sound grew louder, echoing through the night like a drumbeat. "Stay still," Sam whispered. The creature's gaze shifted to the stone slab. It approached slowly, its clawed hands flexing as it leaned over the offering. For a moment, it seemed to study the box and its contents. Then it turned its gaze back to the group. "It's not working," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. "Wait," Mia said. The warden let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Then, without warning, it reached down and seized the rusted box in one massive hand. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. The creature tilted its head, almost as if in acknowledgement. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, its massive form swallowed by the shadows. The silence that followed was deafening. Did it just let us go?" Alex asked, his voice shaking. Sam nodded slowly, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. "I think so." Mia collapsed onto the ground, her hands covering her face. "I can't believe we made it." The forest around them felt lighter now, less oppressive. The faint glow from the symbols began to fade, leaving the clearing in darkness once more. "We need to leave," Sam said, his voice firm. "Now." The group retraced their steps, this time finding a path that led them back to the forest's edge. When they finally emerged into the open air, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. None of them spoke as they walked back to their car. The weight of what they had experienced hung heavily over them. As Sam climbed into the driver's seat, he cast one last glance at the forest. The trees stood silent and still, as though nothing had ever happened. But he knew better. The warden was still out there, watching, and it always would be. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.